certain times. There will be two chairs who will lead the discussions. Huiyao, founder and president CCG and former counselor to China State Council, and Mabel Miao, co-founder and secretary general CCG.
Multilateralism and global governance in uncertain times. This roundtable will be chaired by two of our very distinguished presenters, former state councilor and CCG founder and president Huiyao Wang, as well as CCG co-founder and secretary general Mabel Miao. Welcome.
Welcome, please. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the roundtable of the 11th Annual Forum of China and Globalization. I'm Mabel Miao, Secretary General and co-founder of CCG. It's my great pleasure to co-chair this roundtable alongside with Dr. Huiyao Wang. Our discussion today is centered on a crucial and timely theme, renewing global governance and multilateralism in uncertain times. In facing of escalating geopolitical tensions, growing economic fragmentation, and a surge in unilateral and nationalist policies, the very foundations of the international cooperation are being severely tested. Traditional multilateral institutions and frameworks are challenged by rising mistrust. We mentioned it just now at the opening remarks, competing narratives, and increasing political polarizations. Our aim today is to draw on a diverse expertise of distinguished participants to identify practical paths for reinvigorating multilateralism and fostering a more cooperative, equitable, and resilient global order. We are honored to have with us a distinguished group of participants, former ministers, diplomats, leading experts, and thought leaders, of course, who bring diverse perspectives and deep experience in global governance. We kindly ask everyone to keep your interaction in limited time to allow for rich exchange and smooth flow. With that, let me invite Dr. Huiyao Wang to share your remarks as a co-chair. First, I would like to hand over to you to moderate the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miao, and also thank all the roundtable participants this morning, because this is really a very important roundtable. It's the opening roundtable section. As we all know that we're having this roundtable dedicated to the topic of renew the global governance and multilateralism in the uncertain times. So we have gathered experts from around the world, represented almost all the continent, and in an area marked by geopolitical tensions, economic fragmentations, and rising political polarization. So the imperative to renew global governance has never been greater, and the resurgence of unilateralism and nationalistic agendas is testing the resilience and relevance of multilateral cooperation. As the world grapples with overlapping crises in multilateral trade, security, climate change, and public health and digital governance and AI, and particularly peace and war that we are really facing in our time. So how can we nations rebuild trust in multilateral frameworks? And what reforms are needed to ensure global governance structure remain relevant and inclusive? And how majors like China, US, EU, and of course global South countries continue to a more stable and cooperative order. So I think this is really a very timely issue that we are discussing today, and we are so pleased to have such a distinguished panel joining us. Also, I'm very pleased to report Ambassador Zhang Jun, the Secretary of the Broad Forum, and also the former Assistant Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs is also with us. And to this roundtable and has lots of experience as well. So we'll start this roundtable. Basically, the question we would like to have is what implications does the the second Trump administration brings to the world? I mean, in terms of trade, global institutions, and multilateralism. So for how we can work together to overcome those uncertain times, and how the China, EU, and of course Global South collaborate in a more constructive manner in rising uncertain unilateralism and forced reforms for the key international institutions. For example, just recently, 2 days ago, China announced going to support WHO with $500 million, and Chinese Vice Premier announced that in Geneva. So that's one of the actions that China is doing to support those international organizations. And so what are the new models of inclusive and multilateralism can address in the pressing global challenges, such as climate change, that we haven't really been talked much in the last several months, and AI, and also public health and digital. So to really conclude, to say the question, in a multipolar world, where is the multilateral system exist, and also the narratives that is competing, and how we can really build up consensus, and how the global governance framework can ensure legitimacy, equality, and effectiveness without falling into paralysis. So lots of questions, but so I'm going to chair this, but maybe we'll start with let's hear some U.S. view first. I would like to have Doug Bandow. He's the senior fellow from CATO Institute, and also a participant of this conference, to share your view first. Doug, please.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be joining the conference again, and certainly to start off the discussion is one that I appreciate. We obviously are gathered at challenging times. What we see out of Washington really is a challenge to the established order in many forms of organizations and relationships. And the challenges created by that are obvious. A loss of stability, of certainty, the potential, even overthrow of established relationships and institutions. But it is a moment we could also grasp as one of opportunity. That is, this is a moment to challenge and reconsider institutions that have grown old. The United Nations and Bretton Woods institutions are 80 years old. NATO was created 76 years ago. That these are institutions which persist at times despite the great changes in the international environment. So let me suggest that we use this opportunity to reconsider and to think about alternatives. One option, of course, is to try to update old institutions, but there may be an opportunity to create new institutions to bypass those that have ceased to work and which seem paralyzed to inaction. And there also may be opportunities to move to regional institutions and other civil society institutions to address the kind of problems that we have. I believe that the best balance to unilateralism is, to find a way to alternative solutions of many kinds. Not just one, and not just view ourselves limited to what we have had in the past, but to think creatively about what the future might hold for us. And how to transcend the past. First, I think it requires all countries and civil institutions to be prepared to act and not to wait for any particular country, particularly one that is in the throes of the governmental change we see in Washington, to act. I think other countries have got to be prepared to provide resources and recognize those resources might not be forthcoming from Washington, not only because of the Trump administration, but America's finances. I will, not to bore you with the details of American finances, but leave it to be said, the United States financial system and financial situation is not good, and we see an argument in Washington right now over these issues. And that others need to be prepared to step up and be prepared to move even if established countries are not interested. And my hope is in the future we can see that there is more than what once was called the essential nation, that in fact all countries are essential, that all peoples are essential, and that through civil society institutions and new governmental institutions that we can act out those people and those institutions and solve the problems that we have. And the question is looking at trying to use new technologies, for example, which are transforming our world. That I am someone who grew up reading newspapers. Today we have a very, very different conception of how to transmit news, how to communicate with one another. We can use those to try to deal with the problems of the future. We have new constituencies, a global youth movement that again offers extraordinary opportunities and challenges, who have grown up with a very different set of assumptions and of views of what is possible. We need to find ways to reach needy constituencies, many who in the past have been seen as beyond our reach. I think, for example, of Palestinians suffering in Gaza, of how can we reach those who seem beyond our reach because of where they are situated or the governments that control them. We have to find ways to be able to move beyond. And we also need to find new solutions. And these are ones which I don't have a good set of solutions to offer for this gathering. But I think this, again, let us view what we have before us as a challenge, not just a problem. And it's a challenge that if we grab onto it and succeed in addressing it, that we may very well find ourselves much better off in the future, and ultimately be pleased that we were challenged as opposed to allowed to rely upon failed solutions from the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc, for your very stimulating point from a U.S. think tank point of view, which we have to really tackle all these issues together. I'd like to hear a European voice, perhaps Christian Castro. You are the partner and the CEO of Global Solution Initiative, former German State Secretary to the Digital Society and Consumer Policy. I know you have just successfully organized the Global Solution Summit in Berlin just recently, and I would like to hear from you. Christian, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry, for this nice introduction, and a big thank you also to have this great conference here. Yeah, so indeed, so Houston, we have a problem. There was a famous say pointing to the US, and of course we are all aware that the US say against quite a lot of economic knowledge and experience started a kind of a, say, new mercantilistic approach, which is probably really could create quite a burden also to other related economic issues. So, and economic history tells that this concept has never worked, but only temporary, also in Germany at an ancient time. So, if we start that, I think I still see there is a risk that everybody will lose in the long run, and it will diminish growth nearly everywhere. So, and this is of course most important, what is dear to our global solutions issues. It will also and entirely affect the global South, which is still in need of their own development. And of course, it's still lagging the necessary support. And this is also to be done by trade and other more important issues of technological exchange and really building up, say, own industry in the global South and not just be, I say so, the prolonged work base for the global North. So all this also in spite, of course, we still have a huge ecological challenges around. We have degradation, especially in the Amazonas and other regions of the world. And this is also to be taken into account. So as unilateralism is by and large on the rise, coalitions of the willing, I think, of the progressive and pro-globe organizations and governments, I think, should really get together and combat, I think, this really also very dangerous degradation of the multilateralism and the governance system we have established in the last 80 years since Bretton Woods. So there is a special and I think also renewed case, of course, for cooperation anyway, to reload, say, a new global structure anyway. But we need also, I think, rather more intense and better cooperation between partners. And I would indeed highlight here EU, China, and Asia and Global South. And of course, this partnership should be open to other partners, global partners, of course. So, of course, it's also true that even in this group, also mentioning the EU, I worked for quite a while with EU organizations, there will exist differences on specific issues. But all these should be by far outweighed by a strengthened cooperations on all those issues which need really to be tackled immediately. So I still believe there is a lot of common ground for cooperation between these partners and even beyond some existing differences. So let's create a block of those who are willing to support true global solutions with respect to global problems and the survival of our ecosystems and, of course, our economies and humanity as such in the future. So next generation should not make us responsible for having seen the sign of the times, but did not enact forceful enough. So multilateralism must be renewed and strengthened wherever possible, of course, also including the US, on a more stringent and we need a more global governance with really a fair share for the Global South and creating their own economic and industrial development, as said at the beginning. So, that's it, what I want to tell you. We will have the next Global Solutions Summit in Berlin next year on the 11th and 12th of May, and I may already announce this to the end of my intervention. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Christina. Excellent. I think the Global Solution Initiative is very important, particularly in the challenging time like ours. We lack of global solution, particularly joint global solution. So conference like this is really to build up consensus to see how we can make more global solution to the challenges we're facing today. So thank you for coming and also to propose these great ideas. And now I would like to also have a Chinese representative, and maybe I would like to invite Ambassador Huang Ping. He was also the Consul General of People's Republic of China to New York for 6 years, and he just got back. Perhaps you can share some of your view as well. Ambassador Huang, please.
Well, thank you so much. I served in the U.S. 3 times. I served as Consul General in Chicago and New York. I just came back. Obviously, globalization has created lots of wealth, but the distribution is not that very good. Lots of people are not benefiting from that. That's why lots of people in the US, they're not happy. When I was the Consul General in Chicago, my consul district covered most of the states in the Middle West. And I traveled to states like Michigan, like Wisconsin, all around this Great Lakes. When I was in New York, Ohio is one of the states falling into my consul district. So I've been there many times. So that's the so-called the Rusty Belt. So you would see lots of abandoned factories and people living in that area. I don't think most of them benefited from this globalization. That's why they were not happy. And, they want to the industry back to the US. That's why they support President Trump. If we compare, I came from Guizhou province. I was born and grew up there in China. That was the poorest region or area in China. But now things have changed a lot because China put lots of intention, put people in the center, central government help that area to develop. If you go to Guizhou these days, you will see a very different province, region there. Commonwealth is the most important thing. While you are gaining wealth, creating wealth, you have to make sure the distribution. I think the reason China's kept its stability and the development at the same time is because we not only concentrate on our development, but the distribution of the wealth is so important. So we left like 800 million people out of poverty. So people support this government. China maintained its stability, and that guaranteed its further development. Nowadays, globalization is still developing, but who is going to guarantee? Well, we are creating more wealth. We can still distribute this wealth in a fair ways. I also served as an ambassador to Zimbabwe. I've traveled to lots of, countries like people are still struggling there. But who is going to come out and guarantee they could also be benefited from the future globalization? I think there are many ways. I don't have a solution, but one thing is very important. Major countries need to play a key role, like China, like the US. So you are not going to just point a finger to say, okay, it's your fault. And we need to get united, working, join hands towards the same direction, show the responsibility to help all countries in this world to develop together. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Huang. Yes, great point. I mean, you have lived the changing times in China. You mentioned your province, Guizhou. It's of course now it's one of the fastest growing provinces in China, although it was relatively backward in the past. But certainly also you see this going on in last 6 years in New York. You see how this changing dynamic. Certainly we need to work together and to safeguard the benefit of the mankind and development. Of course, we continue to improve, absolutely. And so thank you again. Now I'd like to invite Mohamed Amersi, the founder and chairman of the Amersi Foundation. I know you've been coming from Middle East region and very active internationally. I'd like to hear from you also, Mohamed, please.
Thank you very much, Henry and Mabel, to have me here again. It's a pleasure to be here as a privileged partner of CCG, as well as a member of its advisory council. Let me start by apologizing for some of my colleagues, Mirika Pejanovic, Ana Palacio, and one or two other people that had a conflicts, schedule conflicts, and had to go and come and go to have their meetings, and they should soon be, I hope, coming back. Today, I may indulge your patience and time, Henry, for a little longer than permitted, because I wanted to pay tribute by dedicating my remarks to a dear friend who passed away a few weeks back. I'm referring to Professor Joseph Nye, a grand figure of American political science and the coiner of the phrase soft power. At a time when hard power and coercion as means of statecraft are making a comeback, his compassion and intellectual rigor will be greatly missed in this world. Soft power, as you know, is the ability to affect others through attraction rather than coercion. Its consequences are slow and often indirect. and it is not the most important source of power for foreign policy, but to neglect it is a strategic and analytical mistake. The Roman Empire rested not only on its legions, but also on the allure of Roman culture and citizenship. As a Norwegian analyst friend of mine described it, the US presence in Western Europe after the Second World War was an empire by invitation and not by force. At the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall collapsed, not under a barrage of artillery, but from hammers wielded by people whose minds had been affected by Western soft power. And today, as is evident, hard power alone will not help resolve the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine. Smart political leaders have long understood the power that can come from values. If I can persuade you to want to do what I want you to do, then I do not have to force you to do what you do not want to do. If a country represents values that others find attractive, it can economize on sticks and carrots. Attraction can always then be used to increase hard power. When I met him earlier in the year, Joseph Nye lamented that Donald Trump clearly did not understand the power of US soft power and had severely undercut it. He was also in no doubt that China valued soft power and stood ready to fill the vacuum that the Trump administration had created. However, while it is easy today to say that Trump is destroying soft power, and it is still too early to calculate his level of damage to the American brand, it is also important to note, firstly, as my other friend, Professor Huntington, in his epic book, The Clash of Civilizations in the early 90s, said that although people around the world might dress and even sound American, but that does not necessarily make them pro-American. The 9/11 hijackers wore blue jeans, drank Coke, and may have enjoyed the occasional Hollywood blockbuster, but that didn't lessen their hatred for America. Secondly, Trump has his own soft power. Nowhere is this better illustrated than his recent escapade to the Persian Gulf. And I call it Persian, or to use the Trump phrase, the Gulf of Iran. For a moment, it looked as if it might be relabeled Arabian Gulf, but sanity prevailed and it didn't happen. Trump's interlocutors see him as the kind of American with whom they can do business. No moral tutorials, no lectures on values, just business and just deals. The feeling is clearly reciprocal. A joke that went viral last week was that Trump might be mixing up Gulf with golf, but the oil-rich Arab monarch states seem to like it. Trump's 18-hole golf courses and the gilded branding on it. Thirdly, for Trump and his comrades, including President Putin, and I use the word comrade deliberately, soft power is too soft and impossible to tangibly measure. But that does not and should not invalidate the goal. Joseph Nye said to me that he found it ironical that so many countries, including China, had asked his advice on how to make use of their own soft power. We both remarked that while the US was busy downsizing the State Department, withdrawing humanitarian and emergency aid from the world's neediest, and downsizing its diplomatic outreach in the global south, China was busy filling this vacuum. The world's consumers may not know or care where their American jeans are made, mostly in China, but they know who comes to their aid when they need help, be it financial, political, or social. It may help to reflect that a country's soft power comes primarily from three sources: its culture, when it's attractive to others, its political values, such as democracy and human rights, when it lives up to them, and its policies when they are seen as legitimate. How a government behaves at home, for example, protecting a free press and the right to protest, in international institutions, i.e. consulting others and multilateralism, and in foreign policy by promoting development and human rights can affect others by the influence of example. As they say, charity always begins at home. So what's the future like for hard and soft powers? In my view, there is a one-word answer that it will not be hard power or soft power, but a new hybrid, which I would like to label techno power. Power will be in the hands of fast evolving technopolar world where tech actors, be they state or private, wielding state-like powers will be making decisions without any legitimate mandate. In this new technopolar world, we will see the emergence of this new hybrid power with focus on cloud systems, cybersecurity platforms, data centers, and satellites. Although it's early days still, the preliminary results are that an increasingly technopolar United States, where a handful of tech leaders enjoy extraordinary power with the implicit or explicit backing of the US government, may need to compete with perhaps a somewhat tightly state-controlled Chinese technology apparatus, where tech titans, and I emphasize may, need to serve political goals. In this new paradigm, the key questions will be whether technology will epitomize existing soft power values and principles, or will we need to invent new ones? If the latter, what will they be? Some of these new techno-utopians from the United States, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, have grown ideologically hostile to democracy as they believe that freedom and democracy are simply incompatible. Caught between these two poles will be the rest of the world. Europe aspires to digital sovereignty but lacks the homegrown tech muscle to pull it off. Much of the global south is being pulled towards one model or the other based on how this model is presented and received. And global institutions that might once have broken a balance are being sidelined or dismantled. And here's the kicker. Though the US and Chinese systems may differ in ideology, they are starting to converge in practice when it comes to values. Both appear to prioritize power, efficiency, and control over and above consent, accountability, and freedom. Therein lies the paradox of this newly evolving technopolar age. Technologies that were supposed to democratize access to power, information, and opportunity will now enable more effective forms of unaccountable control. We have a classic situation of a tail wagging the dog. Control the platform, then design the narrative. Fake or false values are meaningless as they will be presented as the truth and accepted as such. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mohamed. Yes, I agree with you that we should pay tribute to Joseph Nye, which is also a great friend of CCG. He was actually 2 years ago come to this forum in Beijing that hosted by CCG. And I wrote a tribute article for him published at the Pekinology and the CCG Update just 2 weeks ago. And actually, we had many dialogues with him. And he actually entrusted to edit the book for him, Soft Power and Great Power Competition, that you can scan that book free from also the code that we have on this book, on this booklet for the conference. So again, absolutely, we need to see this world. There's too much hard power is being built now, and soft power is diminishing. And it's exactly important that we have to also enhance our soft power of all nations. So thank you again. And now I'd like to have His Excellency Alexander Downer, the former Foreign Minister of Australia, to share your view. I know you are one of the longest serving Foreign Minister in Australia, and we are very pleased you are here. So we'd like to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thank you for having me at the forum. I found the discussion absolutely fascinating up until now. I agree with some of it and I don't agree with some of it as well. So let me just say something about multilateralism and multilateral institutions, because I think it's fair to say they are failing at the moment. They are performing very poorly. This is partly a function of the rise of nationalism. And of course, that's not just in the United States. Let's not single out the Trump administration the whole time. This is also true in many parts, other parts, particularly of the developed world, which has been the leader of globalization, of the process of globalization. So there has been a retreat in the developed world from globalization. And that is a function of the rise of nationalism. And as others have said, this is partly as a result of the reaction from the so-called losers of globalization. That is one of the issues. To be frank, the other really big issue in developed countries is the phenomenon of illegal immigration. And it's not the migrants who in and of themselves are the problem, but the fact that the immigration in such big numbers is illegal, is contrary to the law. And the sense in many developed countries, this is not true of my own country, by the way, but in many developed countries where the government and the people have no say in who comes to live in their country. And that obviously has led to a reaction, and that's led to the entrenchment of nationalist sentiments, which, as we have all agreed, I think so far, is regrettable. And this translates into a weakness of international organizations. So when I think of the United Nations and Security Council, it has been spectacularly unsuccessful in stopping the wars that we see before us. I mean, how has the United Nations been able to stop the war in Ukraine? The United Nations has played almost no role. When it comes to Gaza, the United Nations resolutions have been passed from time to time, but the United Nations hasn't been able to bring that conflict to an end in Sudan. And so the list goes on. And I am somebody who worked for 6 years for the United Nations, so I'm very sorry to see this. But to be brutally honest about it, the United Nations has not been successful. The United Nations did not broker a ceasefire between Pakistan and India recently. Many have claimed they did broker that ceasefire. The Indians and the Pakistanis did the ceasefire, but the United Nations was not involved. So there needs to be consideration given to reform of the United Nations, and I have argued for many years that the permanent membership of the Security Council needs to be expanded. You know, China doesn't agree to Japan being in a permanent member of the Security Council, yet Japan is what, the fourth biggest economy in the world. Japan should be a permanent member of the Security Council. India, Brazil, they should be as well. And Nigeria, perhaps, is the most populous country in Africa. Would you give those countries a veto? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't expand the veto, but I think to have a bigger permanent membership rather than the top-heavy Western-dominated membership. I mean, and China and Russia are part of it as well. I think is disproportionate. And very quickly, in my last minute, I want to say one other thing, and that is to talk about global trade. You know, since President Trump's outrageous tariff policy, which I'm always been opposed to tariffs, I welcome all the countries and the governments have come out now and said they're for free trade, including this country, the People's Republic of China. Hooray! I never thought I'd live to see the day. Suddenly, China, which imposed a huge range of sanctions on my country in 2020, suddenly China is the champion of free trade. Long may that last. Long may that last. And as a champion of free trade, I think China should reduce its tariffs, reduce its level of protection, open up the Chinese economy to more investment, and that will be warmly reciprocated through the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. You know, the way to outmaneuver Trump and the outrageous American tariff policy is to become yourselves a champion of free trade and unilaterally start to dismantle protection. And by the way, the European Union has suddenly become a great champion of free trade, and like China. I think this is wonderful. We have not been able to negotiate a free trade agreement with the European Union because of European protectionism of their agriculture. We have had to abandon those negotiations. Let's resume the negotiations now that we're all anti-Trump and all pro-free trade. I think this is a wonderful development. And China, being the second biggest economy in the world, should take the lead here. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm being naughty. Well, think about it. Don't just criticize the Americans. Think about your own protectionist policies and reflect on them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Well, many of the words were well said. I think actually you see this time when you had launched constant escalation of tariff and trade war, China probably is the only country stand out and against that trade unilateralism in front of the world. I mean, basically, I was at the UN Security Council area meeting last month in New York. 80 countries participated. I spoke there, and I said, we need to really maintain this multilateral trading system. China is doing probably a lot now. For example, China has just this year announced they're giving 43 least developing countries tax zero to come to China unilaterally. Unilateral for free trade. China is taking a lot of progress, and also China and Australia are making a lot of progress. But also Australia is now more in terms of collaborating. We have a free trade agreement with Australia, and so I hope that this political and economic good relation will continue to set good example. And then China wants to join CPTPP, and Australia is part of that. We hope we can expand RCEP and CPTPP together. Thank you, Alexander. Yeah. Now I'd like to have President Fu Chengyu. He was the chairman of Sinopec and a well-known industrialist and a big used to run Fortune 500 country in China for many years, and also well-known in China. So we'd like to hear from you. You were in the past often appeared in Davos, many world stage. We like to hear from you, one of the industry representative from China.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wang, for inviting me to join this roundtable discussion, which is very important, especially on the topics of the U.S.-China relations and the Donald .2 administration. This is a very important topic, especially most of the Chinese pay much attention about what's going on, what will develop, situation will develop in the next few years between U.S. and China. And so this, my comment, the following comment is in the purpose is to mainly communicate with the Chinese. And certainly for those of you who are not coming from this country, and when you hear my comments, don't look at from the angle of right or wrong or good or bad, but only from the angle, this is one of the ideas for a common Chinese citizen. That's why I would like to conduct my comments with Chinese. For those of you who don't speak Chinese, please use your headphone. And
where cooperation is possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, President Fu. And yeah, I agree that we have to really emphasize more on the global south. You know, you probably talk about 6 billion people in the global south. We have 1 billion, 1.4 billion in China, another 1 billion in the developed world, and we have another 6 million in the global south. So absolutely, we need to work on that so that we can really have a more balanced world. And China is doing a lot of that. For example, as I said, China just announced like support $500 million for WHO, which is a great action in the right direction. So thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Danielle Schwazi, member of the executive board of Bertelsmann Foundation and former director and CEO of the German Council of Foreign Relations. But also, I know you are managing director of German Marshall Fund before. So we met you very frequently in many international forums, including Trialogue in Salzburg. So very happy to have you. Daniel, please.
Thank you very much, Henry, for this kind introduction. And thank you for hosting this timely discussion here in Beijing today. I would like to start my remarks by answering your question from a European perspective. What implications does Trump 2 bring to the world? That was your lead question for us this session. Now, Europeans, of course, look at the United States in 3 dimensions. One is our very close security partnership. Many EU members are members of NATO as well. And the transatlantic reliance has provided security on our continent for so very long. Secondly, the United States are a key trading partner of Europe, one among others, of course, but an important one. And the third element is Europe after the Second World War and its way back to a democratic order was accompanied in a very close way by the United States. And speaking to you as a German, I must say that generations have grown up with this understanding of a shared values community, of our very political system being deeply influenced by principles and norms that the United States helped implement in Europe through their sustained activity for decades. Now, obviously, the Trump administration has implications for all of these 3 dimensions. And as we heard from previous speakers, when Europeans think about changing order from a regional perspective, the very high focus at the moment is on our security order. The war on our continent, as Ambassador Keller has said it so eloquently in his remarks, is the top item on every key meeting among European leaders. And so we are worrying in a global perspective, of course, but also regionally about the future of our security order. And while Europe tries to protect its rules-based system, its open economies, it of course also has to invest a lot into rebuilding a new European security order. And it goes without saying that from a European perspective, anyone who directly or indirectly supports the aggressor in this war, which is Russia, which is leading an unlawful intervention in Ukraine, is of concern to Europeans. Now, the immediate implications, of course, of the most recent activities of the Trump administration touch Europe from the economic perspective mostly. Now, we already heard comments on trade and tariff policies. Europe, as an open economy, both within and to the outside world, depends highly on sustaining trade, international trade, and preventing that what is happening at the moment with the imposition of US tariffs on many partners has further ripple effects to other trade relationships. So of course, Europeans are calculating the cost of US tariffs and also the potential costs that US tariffs have on China from a European perspective. But if we look at it from a global perspective, the possible rise of protectionism also as a consequence in other bilateral relationships is of a huge concern to Europeans. So sustaining trade, reliable trade relationships, bringing back certainty and reliability to economic relationships and investment ties is, of course, of a top priority. So we see, in my view, a tendency, while it is a very long shot to revive the WTO, that Europe is indeed more open to bilateral agreements, needs them, because that contributes to overall stability in global trade relationships. But it will make sure that certain principles, such as a level playing field and equal access, are sustained. That is what is a requirement for Europe to be able to continue its economic development in a world where the pressure has definitely risen. My final remark concerns global governance and global order in other dimensions. And I want to pick two examples where I think we have to deal with a new situation in the United States. Obviously, the pulling out of UN structures is of a huge concern. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, was mentioned. I do believe that Europe and China share this interest to work together in the fight against the potential threat of global pandemics in the future, because we know it comes at a huge human, but also economic cost. There has recently been developments in the WHO, which, in my perspective, deserve a lot of support, involving younger generations in a very new way, using technology to improve pandemic prevention and other areas of intervention of the WHO. And I do believe this is one example where new ways can be discovered how to not redesign the whole governance structure, but to very practically make an immediate difference. My second point, and this is the last one, concerns technology in all of this. While I spoke about the potential of technology, from a European perspective, the question of intertwinement of power and technology, as is happening in the United States, as Mr. Amersi just mentioned, is of concern. So Europe should, and I think will not give up its attempt to make sure that through certain bases of regulation, it is made sure that technology, also when used as a means of sustaining global cooperation, is regulated in such a way that it contributes to the common public good and protects basic fundamental rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle, and also for very constructive intervention. Actually, you're right. You know, if EU going to strengthen more bilateral arrangement, I think probably EU join CPTPP would be a good move, and China is also wants to join CPTPP. And furthermore, I think we could probably EU and China lifted the sanctions on parliamentary members, but maybe we could further reinstate the comprehensive agreement on investment between China and EU, and many more. So absolutely, we need to safeguard all those new momentum for free trade in the world. Now, I'd like to hear from another European think tank, Franco Bruni, president of Italian Institute for International Political Studies, ISPI, a very well-known Italian think tank, and Dr. Miao was just in Italy recently attend your event. 1,000 people attended. Very impressive. So, Franco, please.
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you on behalf of ISPI. Well, multilateralism is under attack, obviously, and not only by Trump, and not only today. It has been under attack for a while, also before. The European Union hasn't been a generous contributor to the strengthening of multilateralism, and neither China has been. I fully support the idea that we have to live through this complex and disordered period, looking for coalitions of the willing, as it has been said, to exercise multilateralism in various forms, in various coalitions. I mean, you can change coalition, but you have to manifest to the world the desire of reconstructing multilateralism in all type of issues. It can be a disorder, a period of disorder, but it has to be creative in this sense. Let me make a few examples. Tariffs. Well, tariffs have been, Trump's tariff have been launched with the excuse of macroeconomic imbalances between exports and imports. They are a failure and they only create disorder. But the problem of macro imbalances is there. Therefore, we could start very soon, with the help of the IMF, a coordinated macro policy effort to solve the main macro imbalances in the right way. That is by changing the equilibrium between saving and investment, which is what really determines the balance of payments. And in this sense, I think that the US should cut its deficit, or at least not increase it, which would correct its balance of payments with the rest of the world. China should insist to increase consumption. And this is one of your missions, I understand. Also internally, you have this plan. It should be pursued with the support of the international community and the help of international institutions. And the European Union should invest more and better so as to increase its productivity. I mean, these three actions coordinated in the right fashion could very much contribute to improve the macro imbalances. Diplomatically, there are several other things to do, including what has been already, I think, mentioned, a better involvement of the global South in proposing reforms to multilateral institutions. Europeans, in this sense, could be the leaders because we do occupy certain multilateral institutions, including the IMF, too much. I mean, we have too many votes in the IMF, and we should give up part of our vote in favor of global South countries and China. We should also insist in a nearly hysterical way on reforming the IMF, which is no longer functioning. And this is not only a problem coming from Washington, that certainly creates problems because dominates in a natural way, in natural way the IMF. But the problem comes also from France or from that do not want to give up their extra power in. I will maybe come back to this point this afternoon when we talk about regulations, because reforming IMF means also entering into the financial regulation in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Franco. Yeah, for excellent recommendations. Absolutely. 80 years ago, we established all those institutions of Bretton Woods, but just like a child, the clothes that they're wearing now is growing out of an adult now. So we need a new feet, but absolutely how to reform those multilateral institutions is really a key issue. And I think it's high time that we tackle those challenges, and then by having contributing our think tank consensus there. So it's great. Next, I would like to have another guest from our Middle East, Mr. Rashid Mohamed. He's a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Ni Hao. Before I start my remarks, I'd like to address something that happened in the keynote speeches. When Ambassador Zhang suddenly transitioned from Chinese to English, I thought all of those Chinese lessons finally paid off, but unfortunately, no. So coming back to my remarks, I'd like to start with a question. What happens when the world's most powerful country no longer believes in the system they helped build? This is not a theoretical question, it's a reality we are facing today. We are gathered here at a time of pronounced transition in the international system. The question before us is not about renewing multilateralism, but reimagining global governance in a world that no longer operates on the assumptions of yesterday. So the return of Trump 2.0. A second Trump administration does not only bring political figure back into power, but it brings a worldview. That worldview is transactional, deal-oriented, techno-nationalistic, and distinctly bilateral. It is about making deals, not about building institutions. We've already seen this with the historic visits and strategic alliances between the US and key GCC states. We see China negotiating directly with the US on a potential trade deal. We see Europe recalibrating its security architecture. Everyone is lining up to cut their own deal. The multilateral institutions, the WTO, UN, and others are increasingly sidelined, and frankly, for the next 4 years at least, it will remain so. But here is the pivot I would like to suggest. We shouldn't spend our energy debating Trump 2.0. Trump 2.0 is here. We're living in it. The more critical question is what the world will look like after Trump 2.0. And my answer is more regional, not fully bilateral, not fully multilateral, but regionalism as the dominant structure in a multipolar world. We see this happening today. Just this month, at the end of this month, the GCC ASEAN-China Summit is happening in Kuala Lumpur. This is a signal of what's to come. Regional blocs acting as poles in a distributed multi-nodal global order. Now, can China and the Global South work together to reform the current international institutions? Here I must be blunt. Many of these institutions are toothless, they lack enforcement, they lack political will, and they have repeatedly failed us, especially us in the Global South, on poverty, development, peace. The UN couldn't stop the Russian-Ukraine conflict. It couldn't stop the genocide in Gaza. It couldn't stop trade wars. So we must ask not how to fix them, but whether are they really fixable. I remain skeptical. Instead, I look at regional organizations, not as perfect models, but as effective ones. The GCC, ASEAN, and others. These organizations are not flawless, but they've delivered on security, economic integration, and dispute resolution in ways global institutions have not. This brings me to the future, the model of inclusive multilateralism. We need regional multilateralism, regional organizations delivering regional solutions. It's what I like to reluctantly call globalization. And the reason I'm reluctant because I first heard it from a partner at a global consultancy firm I will not name. But the concept is sound, global coordination through local delivery. The world doesn't need a one-size-fits-all governance model. It needs many models connected and collaborating. We need to rewire the global system from the ground up, using the logic of networks, not empires. Regional organizations must become primarily nodes in this network, and the great powers, mainly China and the US, must begin to see ASEAN, the GCC, and the African Union not as spectators, but as strategic actors. We are not entering a post-globalization world. We are entering a world of regionalized globalization. And if we want legitimacy, equity, and effectiveness in our governance frameworks, we must build them from the regions outward and not the other way around. We are entering an era of what I'd like to call the era of global bridge cities, like Doha. This is because these cities bridge the global nodes. And I'd like also to remind everybody in 2001, Doha was the site where China entered the WTO, which allowed China to realize its economic potential, and for countries, especially in the global south, to reap the benefit of China reaching its economic potential. So thank you, and xie.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rashid. Excellent input. Absolutely. You invent the term globalization, global localization. That's probably the new trend in terms of how this 2.0 of Trump and how we talk about today, this panel, Roundtable is about multilateral system and enhance and improve and enlarge. So by involving regionalism like RCEP, of course, GCC, ASEAN, China, and many more. I would think that's probably a best way to weather this unilateralism that is sweeping around the world, and by strengthening the regionalism and globalization is probably the way going forward. Thank you very much. And you talk about Doha, absolutely. Doha is now have such a big soft power now. Mediating many geopolitical conflicts, but also you have a Doha Forum, which is one of the largest forum in the world, very well recognized. So thank you. Now I'd like to invite Madame Chen Wenling. Madame Chen is a well-known scholar in China, and she was also the former chief economist of China, the China Center for International Economic Exchanges, CCIEE, which is a well-known think tank in China. But also she's a senior academic council member of CCG. And before that, I think before the CCIEE, she was the Director General of Policy Department at State Council for a number of years. So Madame Chen, please.
Thank you very much, CCG, for holding this forum. I'm very happy to hear the views and insights of many Chinese and international scholars. I would like to make 3 observations. First, what are the challenges of multilateralism? The post-Cold War era has ended. Unipolarism is declining, and at this time, we face very serious challenges. For example, some dominant economies. I don't want to talk about Trump a lot because everyone is talking about Trump. I don't want to advise for Trump again. So I'd like to call it the dominant economy. It is just bullying too much, especially the reciprocal tariff on April the 2nd and tariff war against 185 countries. And he swings back and forth, being very capricious. It depends on the emotions of the US president. The second challenge, the dominant power is returning to the empire age, trying to expand the territory and make deals among major countries to mutually recognize the sphere of influence at the expense of middle and small countries disregarding the principle of equality. And thirdly, the hegemony of dominant economy is challenging the order since World War II and the authority of UN and WTO. The US has withdrawn from 15 international organizations and stopped funding to WTO, to WHO. And Harry just said that China contributed $500 million to WHO. And fourth, some hegemony have provoked several wars in the world, and they provoked wars and benefit from wars. As a result, the world is becoming even more complicated because of the wars. Fifth, domestic contradictions, including racial tensions, inequalities, and party-to-party tensions have come to the peak, plus inflation, debt, energy crisis. That country is seriously ill, but they shift the crisis to other countries, and they are sick but ask others to take medication. My second view is that economic globalization has been seriously challenged. The global trade, investment, logistics, supply, energy system have been seriously challenged. And number two, technological revolution is very disruptive, historic, and is growing explodingly. And the technology roadmap between US and China have diverged. US technology more serve virtual economy, and technology is used in war, in global dominance. However, China's technological revolution mainly empowers real economy and combines with manufacturing industry and have created some good capacity and 0 to 1 and breakthrough. So this technological divergence will decide what the world will pick in terms of technology development in the future. Thirdly, the hegemony disregards global rules, international laws, and put its own interest laws above the interests of the world, of other countries. Such practices are becoming more extreme. US has turned its domestic law into international law, and they use domestic law to sanction other countries. And the fourth is overstretching security and politics, which has seriously influenced or affected global economy. And I also have some recommendations. Number one, the world should build consensus to create a resilient and sustainable global governance system to reflect transparency, openness, and fairness. And secondly, we must maintain authority of international organizations so that they can play a bigger role in international affairs rather than giving the power to the hegemony country. And third, we should support multilateral organizational platforms such as G20 or BRICS. And four, China is focused on getting our own house in good order and to advance Chinese modernization and to implement greater openness, including unilateral openness to 43 least developed countries, to China's visa-free policies, etc. So we will introduce more openness policies in the future. So these are my comments on multilateralism and globalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chen, for your excellent remarks. Absolutely. I think we need to maintain the existing global order that we've been celebrating for the last year. Of course, we have to improve, enhance, and enlarge, rather than divide it into two bipolar multilateralism. We need one multilateralism, but then this is more inclusive, and also we need to really have more participation from Global South. Now I'd like to have another chief economist, Fabian Zolig. He's the president of the European Policy Center, a very prestigious think tank based in Brussels. And also EPC is a partner with CCG for the last 5 years on the EU-China think tank exchange program. So you have been in China quite a number of times now. So Fabian, we'd like to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And particularly happy actually to be in this session on global governance and multilateralism. Because I think this is one of the defining issues of our time. But to really get to a solution, I think we have to start with a common understanding of what we actually mean by multilateralism. And it strikes me that when I hear the discussion, that it's not necessarily the same understanding of what multilateralism should mean. I'm speaking very much from a European perspective here, because Europe has been very strongly committed to multilateralism for the last decades. In fact, the European Union is in essence the embodiment of multilateral principles. So we very much understand how multilateralism can work. But of course, we also understand that multilateralism has to change, that the global governance we have at this moment in time is not fit for the time we're living in. There have been many changes, the rise of climate change, for example, the changes in globalization we've seen, and certainly also the demand from many countries around the world for a fairer and a more inclusive system. But we are also living at an age where there are countries, leaders who want to destroy the multilateral system, or those who undermine the multilateral system by the actions they are taking. For example, weaponizing interdependence, using economic means to achieve political goals. So for me, what is at the heart of multilateralism? It is a rules-based order. A rules-based order where rules apply to everybody, regardless of differences in power, differences in size, differences in political system, where power and superpower is mitigated and channeled for the common good, to address common challenges such as climate change and sustainable economic development. Multilateralism means a consistent adherence to common principles, such as those embodied in the UN Charter, principles such as the protection of territorial integrity, of sovereignty, protection from wars of aggression from side. It is clear that the world has become multipolar, but that does not create multilateralism automatically. Multipolarity is not an ordering principle. Only if the multiple poles are adhering to common principles, to common rules, to submit to common authority, can we really achieve a better governance. That is precisely the lesson we had to learn in Europe, where the strongest and the weakest are bound together by a set of common rules accepting that we have to make difficult compromises for the common good. In the absence of common rules, we live in a world where might is right, in a world of conflict where the global commons are not protected, where we have predatory trade, where the small and the weak suffer, and where there's chaos, not order, anarchy, not multilateralism. As stated at the outset, Europe is very committed to multilateralism as the ordering principle of global governance. But that means reform. It means working together, having common action to prevent a world of fragmentation, of instability, and the uncontrolled exercise of power. So very much looking forward to working with the global community, which is committed to multilateralism as the ordering principle, so that we can achieve an effective multilateral global governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabian. Absolutely. I think we are getting into a multipolar world, but we don't have a multilateral system to support that. That transition, I don't know how long it's going to be, but absolutely we need to build up the consensus and work together by all nations, particularly those major countries that should set a good example. Now I'd like to have my friend Lucas Tuskalis. You are the president of the board of Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, but also I know you're a professor at Science Board too. So great to have you. Your input, please.
Thank you very much. You have invited us to reflect on how to renew global governance and multilateralism in uncertain times. And I think it's more than uncertain times. To be frank, we live through the end of an era. And we know what the era that is leaving us behind looked like. We are not yet at all sure what the new era will look like. And the intermediate phase may be long and can also be extremely dangerous. The signs of the end of an era preceded the return of Mr. Donald Trump to power. And let us remind ourselves very briefly what the old era looked like. It had, I believe, three main features. One was unipolarity, or undisputed US hegemony. The second was economic globalization in its liberal or perhaps neoliberal economic version. And the third was the integration of China into the global capitalist system. All those three things were happening against the background of ongoing technological change, which was dramatic, technological change that was changing rapidly our economies, our societies, and the way we live every day, and also against the background of growing existential challenge facing the whole of humankind, namely climate change. Now, changes, as I've already argued, have preceded the return of Mr. Donald Trump. We've been witnessing for some years the dispersion of power, the end of unipolarity, although the US is likely to remain for quite some time the most powerful country in political, economic, and military terms. We've been experiencing also, because of the geopolitical shifts, the return of security considerations taking precedence over economic efficiency concerns. And that in turn affects globalization, because if people put an emphasis on security as opposed to economic efficiency, this is bound to affect the process of economic globalization. Furthermore, there was something else, and this was that economic globalization produced many benefits, but benefits were very unequally distributed, especially within the developed world, which is increasingly challenging the process of globalization. And last but not least, we've been asking more and more for the revision of rules to govern economic interaction between very different systems, both economic and political systems. Now, let me end by saying a few words about what could be Europe's contribution to the remaking of the international system. Now, Europe's contribution inevitably will be a function of the key distinguishing features of Europe and its historical baggage. Let me again summarize the likely European contribution in three main elements. The first is that, as we all know, Europe has been engaged for several decades in what I consider to be a revolutionary political project, which is European integration and which is meant to establish peace, open borders, and share sovereignty among countries that invented national sovereignty in the first place. And we've been doing that through common institutions, common rules, long dialogue, and compromise. And this is precisely the things that ideally Europe should contribute to the remaking of the international system, namely dialogue, compromise, institutions, and rules. And furthermore, for you not to worry too much, Europeans are not coming back as missionaries. They combine a missionary approach with a more realistic view of global politics, which I welcome. The second feature of Europe is that Europeans have open economies. And because they have open economies, they treasure economic interdependence. But as long as economic interdependence is governed by rules, and rules that are considered to be fair by everybody, and rules that do not allow too much of free riding by whoever. And the last point I would like to make is that Europe has been a pioneer in the provision of public goods, and Europe will continue to be a pioneer in the provision of public goods, and most notably, the provision of a livable environment. So the fight against climate change, one should expect Europeans to be among the leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas. Good point. Yeah, absolutely. I think Europe is the biggest peace project that we're able to see in the modern times, and now more strategic autonomy needs to be encouraged after this conflict in Europe, in Ukraine with Russia. So we hope that the trilateral relation between US, China, and the EU could be more independent and more cooperative. Next, I would like to really have President Sun Jin-sun. She's the Vice President of China Foreign Affairs University. And you know that China Foreign Affairs University is very prestigious in China and probably has trained over 500 Chinese ambassadors in the last, 60, 70 years. Is very, very prestigious. So we're very fortunate to have President Sun join us. We'd like to hear from you. President Sun, please.
Okay, thank you, Harry, for the introduction, and thank CCG for the invitation. We have discussed quite a lot about multilateralism and global governance. Definitely, multilateralism is undergoing profound changes, and global governance is facing severe challenges. So I'll talk about why and how to move forward. So why? Probably three observations. Number one, the foundation on which multilateralism operates has changed greatly with the change of distribution of power. Of course, the direct result is the narrowing gap between the developing countries and the developed countries, and also the narrow gap between China and the US. And what about the influence? Actually, the change of distribution of power also influences countries' self-perception, mutual perception, perception towards the international order and international system. And then we see the difficulty of reaching consensus, the hesitation or even unwillingness to cooperate, the increase of misperception and misunderstanding, and then the lack of mutual trust. And more importantly, we see the increase of geopolitical competition and high-profile return of traditional security threat in world agenda, which severely threaten the stability and effectiveness of the current international order. So this is the first reason. And the second reason is facing all the above changes, the international institutions and international rules and norms, etc., on which multilateralism and global governance rely on all the time, have not kept pace with all these changes. They are regarded as inefficient, ineffective, and even failure. No matter whether to deal with financial crisis or COVID-19 or the current crisis in Ukraine or Gaza, so on and so forth. And of course, the third reason comes from the choice of the US, which actually produces a long-lasting positive effect, especially from the additional perspective. For instance, the United States actually is not willing to provide public good anymore. And then the attitudes towards globalization also changed. Then the attitudes towards international organizations and international rules and norms also change. So that severely damages the spirit of contract. So they actually greatly influence a very severe result, that is, it influences international cooperation. And then people began to worry more about unilateralism, power politics, or even the law of jungle. And then what about the future? How to move forward? I think number one, facing these instability and challenges, we do need to address perception and attitudes. We should establish proper perception towards this world, especially for major countries, because President Xi also always emphasized big countries or major countries should behave or should do as major countries. Especially for global governance, no country can deal with global issues alone, no matter how powerful you are. And the second point is we do need to strengthen institutional building because institutions, no matter for multilateralism or for global governance, they are extremely important. So institutional building relies on two folds. One is to reform the current institutions. Of course, we mentioned UN and also the other UN special agencies, so on and so forth. But of course, now it's extremely important because of the competition among major countries. And then when we mention institutional building, another thing we can do is we focus or we turn more to regional institution building, such as African countries or Asian countries, so on and so forth. So in this fragmented world, regional institutional building are more important, probably can play better roles. And then another focus we can turn to is to turn to specific issue areas because we face so many different kinds of global problems, and then different countries have different concern and worry, probably using one specific issue area, and that it can link more countries together. Of course, meanwhile, we also need to provide tangible support to these international organizations or institutions. Last year, when I visited UN headquarters in Geneva, I was told that in order to reduce the cost, they even reduced the number of the guards or shut off the elevators to save electricity or even to adjust the temperature of air conditioner. So they are really lack of financial support. So last but not least, we are having this forum in CCG, well-known think tank. So I think think tanks can also play a better role in this digital and AI world because now we are also facing the collision and the competition of different narratives, misinformation and disinformation. So probably think tanks can play a better role to better educate the public, to better shape the public opinion, so as to make people better understand what is the most important thing and the right things for the world to make effort for. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, President Sun. Okay, excellent points. I know that China Foreign Affairs University is under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You've trained a lot of Chinese future diplomatic leaders. So thank you for your contribution. I'd like to have our friend from Delphi Economic Forum and Constantino Tescalas, the head of content at Delphi Economic Forum. Delphi Economic Forum, by the way, is also one of the largest forum in Greece and very successfully run. So we'd like to hear from you, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the kind words. So allow me to share some thoughts on the implications of the current US administration stance for multilateralism and global governance. So the current US administration represents an ideological paradigm shift in the way the US approached internationalism in the last 35 years. The main thread of this shift is the reversal of the post-Cold War assumption that the US significantly benefits from a system of predictable and consistent global rules and institutions. The whole nexus of the latter is no longer viewed as the expression of a conscious self-limitation of power in the name of overriding values, neither as an instrument of soft power, as the late Joseph Nye would say, but as mechanisms of expropriation of American dominance and prosperity. There seems to be a structural antithesis between the America First logic and the logic of multilateralism. The latter needs time to bear fruit, presupposes the readiness to make compromises of self-interested sovereignty, as well as considerable funding transfer from wealthier to less wealthy states. None of these seem compatible with the America First ideology. To be sure, how the West understood its commitment to multilateralism has always been open to interpretation, but the implementation of an openly transactional approach by the current US administration that uses multilateralism when it serves its interests, exits or blocks multilateralism when it does not, replacing it with unilateral action and bilateral agreements, or bargains its participation to extract concessions from allies and partners, hugely undermines the trust in the systems of efficiency and opens the door for other willing parties to withdraw from rules, commitments, restrictions. But if we want to assess the consequences of this development, we must be sincere about its sources. The current US administration is the symptom of the problem, not the cause. The latter relates to a broader and long-time coming crisis of the idea that the world could share some common values. This is due to the fact that the globalization paradigm failed in some aspects to deliver its promise. On the one hand, we're talking about the systems, certain institutions of which were set up during the age of the end of European colonialism, reflecting imbalances of power and injustices, mostly at the detriment of the global South and East. On the other hand, in the West, the system's emphasis on financialization created immense inequalities of wealth domestically. The result is that even before the current US administration, and despite the considerable contributions to tackle global problems, forms of global governance were seen as embedded in a kind of metapolitics. The formal structures were there, but their substantial meaning was emptied out. They were looking like empty shells. So the new US administration accelerated and actually imploded this whole process of fragmentation and delegitimization. Now, the main issue for the supporters of international cooperation, and I'm speaking here from a European perspective, is how can we legitimize structures of global governance and multilateralism, since despite the fragmentation, contemporary issues require more than ever cooperation. To tackle this, I think that we must answer two crucial questions. First, is it sufficient to restore the previous system as it was? And second, can the system work without the participation of one major stakeholder or the commitment of all parties to democratic procedures and respect of rules? The realist should answer in the negative to both, but this means that even if we aim for a reformed multilateralism, stronger and more equitable, we should prepare ourselves for a different outcome, a normatively thinner or limited sector-based international cooperation. Let me explain myself. reinforcing multilateralism today presupposes defending the idea of common values and rules, but reimagining its structures, differentiating them both from the isolationist pre-war paradigm and the hyper-globalist one of the 90s, allowing paradigms of social and global justice to emerge. This is, however, an almost utopian task, given the present ideological and geopolitical divides. But since specific global problems are more pressing than ever, one should experiment with different strategies, including working with or giving some concessions in areas where a stakeholder's commitment is vital, working in some public goods without a major stakeholder, even form coalition of the willing not to create solidified new blocs, but with the aim of strengthening or reforming international institutions or introduce new methods to improve multilateral work. Undeniably, this new setting places a huge burden on middle and low power countries that must navigate themselves in a very difficult power-based environment. Now, speaking again from a European point of view, EU, both as a regulatory and a democratic rule-abiding power, could have a huge role to play in this transitory setting. Time will tell if it will be up for the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Constantino, for your good comment as well. You know, we absolutely need to how to reform this challenging world, and how can we work together is crucial, and particularly for lacking the incentive of some country now, and we need to work together. But also, I'd like to now have Jonas Zangambadi is Executive Director, Institute for Peace and Diplomacy from Canada. We know that Canadian just had the new Prime Minister, and we hope that China-Canadian relation can be improved like we did with Australia. So your turn, please.
Thank you very much, Henry, for the kind introduction. It's also a great privilege and honor to be amongst distinguished speakers and panelists. I'm also happy to be representing Voice from Canada, a country that I believe many of you have seen in the news just since the beginning of this year, as opposed to the past decade, given what we're experiencing with President Trump. And as for my speech, what I've done is to organize it into three interrelated segments, starting with framing the geopolitical order and highlighting the increasingly important of interest-based thinking and pragmatism within foreign policy discourse and strategic circles, especially in the West and Canada, that I can speak for as well. And then I'll speak to the shifts that we see in this new order, especially in how multilateralism is now conducted these days as opposed to the past, and how we can best utilize that moving forward, at least in the short term. And finally, I'll try to present some practical approaches and methodologies that can be utilized by major powers and in coordination with middle powers as well as smaller ones to address the challenges and opportunities that we are faced with within this new world order. So let me get through these as quickly as possible. The first segment is easy, as we all know that I think there's almost a global consensus that we've moved on from this unipolar moment where we had the US as a global hegemon to more of a multipolar moment where we have great powers such as China, Russia, as well as middle powers challenging the long-standing institutions, conventions, as well as norms championed by the US. And it's important to understand that within this more of a multipolar moment or order, there are two important shifts that are happening, in particular with respect how countries are rethinking and crafting their foreign policy in the West. And again, I can speak for Canada here. Many countries, especially after return of President Trump to the White House, are moving away from this value-driven and globalist agenda in their foreign policy. The foreign policy discourse is now very much defined by interest and pragmatism, which wasn't the case even during Trump's first presidential term. And having a Canadian Prime Minister, as Henry mentioned, Mark Carney, say that our old relationship with the US is over is huge, both within the Canadian political discourse as well as the Western overall. The second shift that we see is with respect to how states are increasingly interested in conducting multilateralism which is now true minilateralism, other than global and large multilateral institution coalition building approaches. And that's because there is a realization that growing internal divisions within these large multilateral institutions hinder taking effective measures to address the challenges that we face today. Finally, let me share my humble suggestions on some of the practical approaches that can be utilized for multilateral cooperation, especially by great powers that can later facilitate a broader multilateral cooperation, including other countries as well. To do that, first and foremost, it's crucial for major powers to acknowledge that the strategic competition is going to be with us here for foreseeable future. However, at the same time, that there should be also commitment to making an effort to compartmentalize foreign policy challenges and identified areas of collaboration to address mutual challenges of common interest. This can be done case by cases on smaller issues to build trust along the way for more comprehensive and multilateral cooperation. One example that can be highlighted as a potential of this approach being practical is the Saudi-Iran normalization brokered by China, which we know for a fact that it was green-lighted and supported by the United States. Imagine if there was a multilateral mechanism in place, however small, through minilateral format, that would have allowed such cooperation to happen sooner, which would have been beneficial both for the region and the international community. There are also other areas that cooperation can take place, from maritime security to nuclear non-proliferation, as well as the climate change, but that requires compartmentalization of challenges between great powers as well as others. And in conclusion, I would say multilateralism will be there, but it will be not as large and globalized as it used to be, especially in practice. And it will be multilateralism through various groupings focused on specific issues that will be the dominant trend, until we see proper structural reforms and new global institutions that can be more inclusive and effective and trusted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Yang. So I think absolutely Canada is one of the strong forces in multilateral system, and China and Canada can really work together to continue to safeguard free trade and the multilateralism. So thank you from your point from Canada. Now we probably run out of time, finish all the participants, but I'd like to have a final a round of the morning opening remarks speaker and the keynote speaker. Just briefly give you 3 minutes, probably a final observation and an intervention. So maybe I'll start with James Chau, the president of China-US Exchange Foundation. So why don't you start first, James?
Thanks very much, Henry. Just 3 very quick points. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of the range of points that have come up today are very useful, and I wanted to drop in on a few. The first one being the intensifying US-China technology competition, especially in AI and quantum computing. That risks fragmenting global technological ecosystems into what I think will be incompatible blocks, which undermines multilateral collaboration on critical issues, not only on AI safety, ethics, but also governance. And I think that the boiling point that this will then create is a growing strategic risks and threatening global stability unless these 2 countries can engage in urgent diplomatic efforts to establish shared international norms and regulatory frameworks. How that actually happens, I'm not quite sure. And I think that many people have pointed out or alluded to the fast shifting sands, where it's so hard to make accurate predictions. I mean, nothing is fail-safe. Everything, there is a calculated risk involved. But I think we've walked into this environment where the conditions are so unstable in a way globally, but also almost like a knee-jerk reaction flitting here and there, which makes it all the more difficult. My second point is that reforming multilateralism for the 21st century, I think, will involve enhancing inclusiveness, legitimacy and robustness of global institutions, the very ones that are under threat right now. I mean, I'm Chinese, but I grew up in England, and we benefited very much in that environment from those robust institutions. But even there's a big question mark too. So I think why that's important is that we need to address the inequalities, which is what the president of Asia Society brought up. That globalization, for all its goodness, has also given way to this enormous wealth divide, which I think here in China they're trying very hard to avert, what we're seeing elsewhere in other developed countries. So addressing inequalities, but also accommodating diverse interests, while also preventing nationalist fragmentation, which is what the former foreign minister from Australia spoke about in terms of nationalism. We've been seeing this trend for well over a decade now, where this narrowing space is being created by this rising trend towards populism, and this inward thinking that comes out of this island mentality has been one of the resulting factors of this trend. So in sum, I think renewing global governance and multilateralism amid the uncertainty that we've spoken of critically depends on managing US-China relations, balancing competition with cooperation, and reforming institutions, which has come up again so many times, to be more inclusive, legitimate, and effective in addressing transnational challenges. And just one thought to finish off with. I don't come from a US-China background. I come from a background, in this space at least, closely tied to HIV and AIDS. And I think that HIV and AIDS, which is one of the areas which is under severe threat now with the stay of execution hanging over the PEPFAR program in the United States, but also a big question mark over foreign aid everywhere around the world, or in many places around the world. The very successful approach to HIV and AIDS offers a really good playbook. I mean, China used it very well. Australia used it very well as well, where you allow political leadership to freely combine with science and civil society. I think where that's relevant to renewing global governance today is where you do allow more actors to come into the space. And I think at a time when so many governments are being voted in and out, every 4 years, or they're changing. There was a period in the UK where they changed very rapidly after 30 or 50 days or something. So we need more stable actors to be working with government, and I think that's that also speaks to many of the points that people have brought up here today. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, James. Now I'd like to have Ambassador de Cleen from Chairman of VPC. Just briefly, just a few words to say that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Henry. First of all, I think this has been an extremely good session, and I think all of the contributors made very rich and very valuable points. I would just very briefly focus on four quick aspects. Number one is multilateralism is clearly of great importance to everyone around the table, but it is important to be clear as to what multilateralism means. And also we need to be clear that multilateralism needs to be effective. It needs to be operationalized, and operational multilateralism. Secondly, I was very struck by the reference to the role of regional organizations. And clearly, two obvious consequences of a greater focus on regional organizations is how they combine and how they cooperate, both at the regional and at the super-regional level. Third, I think it is important to ensure that in an era now where we have a deadening effect of a tariffs culture, that trade and international economic cooperation is sufficiently vibrant to counteract that deadening effect. And that's why, for example, the European Union is now very actively seeking to both complete certain trade agreements, certainly with Latin America, Mercosur, with Canada, with CETA, and also is reaching out to other countries all around the world and other organizations to try and warm up trade negotiations. I think that's a very important counterbalance to the deadening effect of the growth of the tariffs culture. And finally, and it's an important point, the reform of the UN institutions. That's absolutely right. I just recall that the rules of procedure of the Security Council, I think, are still provisional. and the Security Council was created in 1945. So I think there are general arguments and important arguments that the UN institutions need to be looked at, need to be reformed, need to be made, as has been said, fit for purpose for the new era. Thank you, Henry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ambassador de Cleen. And now I want to give the final words to Secretary General Minister Zhang Jun for your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Henry. Actually, I have laid out what I wish to say at the beginning of this session. And but I do find the discussions very much interesting, and I was very much impressed by what I heard from the guest speakers from different perspectives. With your permission, I wish to emphasize on the following points. First, while many things are happening in the world, and we have heard a lot about the uncertainties we are confronted, I think what we really need to be more vigilant is that we have to do our best jointly, globally jointly, to prevent the worst to happen. I'm not exaggerating the situation we are facing today, but you have all mentioned the failure of the international institutions, including security and peace institutions, including economic, financial institutions. And you have mentioned the several situations in the Middle East, in Europe, and in other parts of the world. That shows clearly that if the current international institutions continue to fail to function, definitely there will be some vacuum to be left. And then some troublemakers will make use of those vacuum and then to create more problems. So, and then if big countries fail to work closely with each other, and then definitely all the rules will not be abided by, and all the institutions will not work well, like the Security Council of the United Nations. So then, even though we do not have the intention to have another third world war, I mean, from the huge majority of the world, but accidentally the world might be dragged into a more larger regional or world war, even including a financial war, a trade war, a global trade war. So I'm not pessimistic, but we have to be prepared for the worst, and then try our best to prevent the worst to happen. And secondly, we have talked a lot about the global governance, and of course, we hope that all the good things will happen. But in my personal view, and in the foreseeable future, well, what we will have to see is still a transition of global governance. So we are, in particular, after the trade war, the tariff war, we will have more evidence to show that the world order is entering a transitional period of time. With that, first, of course, the current international institutions will continue to be defended. We all talked about multilateralism. And then based on that, we will defend the UN, we will defend multilateral institutions. But meanwhile, we have also mentioned that they are not functioning well, so we have to reform. I wish to based on my 9-year working period in the Security Council, no reform will be easily realized or easily done, simply because it's not that simple. And also simply because all the decisions concerning reform have to be going through the approval of those who are sitting in the chair controlling the power. The decision, even though it's a provisional rules of procedure, but those procedures are in the decision, are in the hands of those who are holding the power. So it won't be easily going through that way. And also, you know, Minister Donner mentioned this reform of the Security Council, and also because of the nature of the reform, it's not that easy. It's not a simple mathematic game, simply adding 1 or 2 numbers. It's really something fundamentally concerning the
peace and security of the world. So we have to make sure that it's moving forward instead of moving backward. We have to make sure that it makes the Security Council working more effectively instead of making one decision after 3 days discussion. It doesn't work. Only with 15 members, it's not working well. If you have it 25, it will be even easier. And we have to make sure that all the major countries, mid-sized countries, are also sitting there with us, making sure that our decisions are fairer and more justified. In that case, in that sense, China firmly supports having more developing countries sitting in the Security Council. That's the basic position of China. So while we defend the institutions and then to reform, try our best to reform, I think what's also happening, I think Mr. Bandow mentioned that, and the creation of new institutions are going on. I think that will continue to develop, like what's happening in the Asian part of the world, the establishment of AIB and also the establishment of BRICS, New Development Bank. So whether these standing institutions work or not, more institutions will be in place in catching up with the fundamental changes of the general landscape of the world. And third, judging from what I have seen from Asia, I think the current situation, including the tariff war, will give more pressure for regional countries to strengthen their regional arrangements, including economic integration, including regional frameworks on currency, on payment, on connectivity, on communications, on transformations. All those things will be further strengthened through regional and bilateral arrangements. So with the missing of multilateral solutions, I believe that more solutions will come up from regional joint efforts in the coming days. And my last point is that while the world is behaving like this and it gives more obligations to think tanks, I think for think tanks, we are not decision makers, but we do have a very important role to play. First, we need to tell decision makers whatever objectives they set from their national perspective, they need an international dimension. They need a good international environment. Without a good international environment, no goals, no objectives will be realized. And second, we need to tell the world through our academic studies, that's what BFA is doing, that the world is really changing. You may like the world going back to Cold War era or 50 years ago, but the reality is that the world is changing. You have to adopt a mindset catching up with the profound changes of the world. And third, for think tanks, we need to, while politicians are adopting or making decisions based on their national perspective, I think for think tanks, we are the ones to adopt a more broader mindset, and not simply based on my national perspective, European perspective, Asian perspective. And we do need to come up with some joint solutions based on joint perspectives. That's what I wish to add. Thank you so much. I hope I did not delay the launch of the lunch.
No, I think, thank you, Ambassador Zhang. Excellent concluding remarks, actually very impact and very comprehensive. Absolutely, I think you have said well at the end that the think tanks, like a forum like this is really absolutely important. That today we had 300 participate throughout the 2 days, but also over 60 countries, different think tanks, policymakers, and academics, and also industry, business, all gathered here to talk about those jointly concerned initiatives. And I think this is really a great platform. And we, CCG, will take a good notes, we'll take a good recordings, and we'll make relevant briefs and recommendations to the relevant organization departments in China. So once again,